advocate and supporter of women in wills since probably the beginning, isn't it, Claire?
Quite
Um,
close. I don't think I was far off.
yes. Yeah, so effectively, just a reminder, as Ray said, we're here under the Women in Wills banner that's run by Today's Media. I'm Pippa Shepherd. I'm Head of Customer Engagement at Ark and Legal. We provide will drafting software plus a myriad of different products to help with risk management, lead generations, digital data capture, etc. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Here we're talking about family secrets.
Yeah, definitely.
So let me introduce you to Claire. Claire is an award-winning researcher. She's got over 13 years experience in the legal services industry. She works with Langton Genealogy, specializing in probate research, and also has been self-employed for the last 14 years. Claire supports private client solicitors. She identifies and locates beneficiaries in cases of intestacy, as well as tracing missing beneficiaries. So this has all come about, as I understand, from a real passion for history, and you enjoy exploring family trees and uncovering how historical events have influenced the lives and stories of the families she researches. All sounds very cloak and dagger. So we're going to talk about family secrets, and I'm sure you've uncovered many of them today, Claire. But first of all, can I just say, what got you into genealogy? What started you in this whole process to begin with?
Well, it was my own family history, really. I'm going to politely say that my mum's family history is very convoluted. Um, although we know who her dad was, he wasn't named on her birth certificate. Her mum was one of 10 children, born all over Ireland. Although actually my gran was born in Liverpool, weirdly. She was her and her eldest sibling were both born in Liverpool, but all the others were born in Ireland. Um, and I say there's 10 of them because I've only been able to identify 10, but purportedly there was 14. So I think there were probably some who died, probably were born and died pretty much straight away.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was what got me started. And also I love anything about history, particularly the Tudors and that kind of thing.
So genealogy, just explain to anybody who doesn't know what actually is genealogy.
Genealogy is family history research, basically. So identifying who's in your family tree, finding information about people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, brilliant. So let's get into the nitty-gritty then. Are there any fascinating or surprising discoveries you've made while researching somebody's ancestry? We want you to spill the secrets here, Claire. So come on, give us some juicy stories of what you've uncovered in the past.
Oh well, there's all kinds really. I think what one of the first cases that I worked on. So originally, when I started the business, I did a lot of bone vacantia work. Um, and so when I set up the business, I did a few cases and basically fell flat on my face and didn't really get very far. But then there was this one particular case that caught my eye, and I had actually seen it on the Air Hunters program
Oh, yeah,
before
yeah.
I started the business. But the geek in me, because I'm that into family history, had written down the details, and it was actually a lady called Pearl Knight. And the name obviously is quite unusual, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it was investigated by one of the larger firms who were on the show, and unfortunately, they couldn't identify who she was. She'd been in a long-term relationship, and people thought that the couple had been married, but clearly they hadn't been. Anyway, a new resource came out called the 1939 Register after I'd started the business, which is basically like a census that was taken at the beginning of World War II to identify people for conscription, rationing, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so on there were two ladies called Pearl, one who had died before Pearl Knight, so clearly wasn't the right person, and then another lady who was called Pearl Mitchell. And basically, I backtracked her information, and it turned out that she was Pearl Knight. And
Wow.
her partner, Hugh, who everybody thought she'd been married to, was actually somebody that she'd had a relationship with, but for whatever reason, they'd never got married. I think her husband, when I spoke to her husband's family, I think her husband had divorced her in absentia. Absentia? Is that how you say it? I'm not
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
sure. So yeah, so there were about 20 plus beneficiaries in the end.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so how do you go about then finding all of these different beneficiaries?
It can be tricky, you know. Obviously, first of all, we map the family tree because once you've identified everybody, that's half the battle.
Yeah,
Depending on the solicitor, some solicitors are quite happy for you to chat to people, maybe, or sometimes it's maybe a maternal cousin who's the administrator, and they'll know a lot about their side, and that's actually quite easy to deal with. But
yeah,
then it's looking at the paternal side of the family as well. So
yeah,
quite often you'll find that, you know, cousin Jeff used to come for Christmas dinner and they've met each other, but they've no idea what's happened to him or that kind of thing.
yeah,
So it's sometimes using talking to people is really helpful for me because that then starts the basis of what I'm looking for really, rather than me just sort of going off into the dark. And particularly if we're looking for the Smiths or the Joneses, the more information we can get from people, the better.
yeah, absolutely. So, do you find many occasions where there's like children that you didn't know, or I'm fascinated when you watch all these different TV programs, and there happens to be like a complete surprise family that nobody knew, secret family. Have you ever found out anything interesting in that kind of
Yeah,
environment, like
yeah,
new
I have. I
children,
did some
etc.?
family research for a gentleman who basically his grandfather had kind of disappeared at the end of World War II and nobody knew what had happened to him. And when we started uncovering things, turned out even he'd gone off and he basically had a long-term relationship with somebody else, had a whole of the family, and they were literally like 5 miles up the road or something and
Oh
didn't know
wow,
anything about each other. Yeah. Um,
wow. So from your
as it happens, it all turned
yeah,
out very nicely and everybody was quite happy to have been found. And as I
yeah.
understand it, they do speak and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was a bit of a revelation at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, from your experience, would you say that most families have some skeletons in the closet or people that
I
they
think
they
there's
don't
always
do?
something in every family, even my own family. I mean, when my dad passed away, I was talking to one of his brothers and I said, "Oh, we'll have to tell such and such about dad." And one of my daughters said to me, "Who's that?" And I was like, "It's Papa's brother." And she's like, "Is it?" You know, but because he doesn't speak to us, it's just one of those things.
Yeah,
Um, it was just she I don't know, she just dropped off the radar as far as she was concerned. I think she'd just
yeah.
forgotten him.
So let's delve down into your love of history, which obviously is a key part of it. You said you like the Tudors and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, is there any kind of like particular elements in history that jump out at you, especially that drove you into this?
Um, well, I was always fascinated by Henry VIII. I think all those wives. And
Yeah,
as anybody on the call who knows me well will know, I am absolutely obsessed with the musical Six, which is about his
yeah.
wives. Me and my daughter have seen it 5 times now.
Oh, you'd be well with my daughter then. She'd be singing along with you.
Well, yes. Funnily enough, my daughter was telling me yesterday that apparently it's coming out at the cinema. They're doing
Yeah,
the original cast. They're doing a version of it, and then they're going to release it
cinema.
at the
Yeah,
cinemas, which I'm very excited by. So that was one of the things. And The Princess in the Tower is another one that I love the story of, that kind of mystery of whatever
oh, come
happened
on,
to them
tell
and
us
that
about the
kind of thing.
Princess in the Tower then, because that's quite interesting. Because there's a relative of mine way back when, I know my granny always used to say that was one of the nannies for the Princess in the Tower.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so go
That's
on, I'm
interesting,
fascinated.
isn't
Tell us a
it?
little bit more about the Princess in the Tower.
So the princes in the tower were the children of now let me get my Edwards right, Edward the Fourth. And So it was Edward the Fifth who was never crowned, and his brother who was called Richard. So basically, they were taken off to the Tower of London, which is where the royals lived at the time,
Yeah,
ready for the coronation. And then Richard III stepped in and had them declared as illegitimate because I think Edward IV had been previously betrothed to somebody other than their mother. So that's how he got
yeah,
it. Parliament declared them illegitimate, and he then became king, and they kind of got pushed to the side.
yeah.
But then after the summer of the year where their father passed away, there's no trace of them. But then
Uh-huh.
I think years later, there were some skeletons found in the tower, which is purportedly their
Yeah.
remains. So there's quite a lot of theories about who potentially may have been the orchestrator of their demise, as it were. And there are also cases where people have popped up in the future and they've claimed to be one of them. So it's, as I say, all still shrouded very much in mystery. But I put a LinkedIn post out actually recently about a will that had been found at the National Archives.
Yeah.
And in the will, the lady called, can't remember, Catherine or Mary Chappelle, I think, she had left a chain that belonged to Edward's son in her will, and she's left it to her son and says that it belonged to his father. Now, the connection there is that her father-in-law, brother-in-law, I should say, called James Tyrrell, actually worked for Richard III. So you could kind of see how potentially she would end up with this piece sort of thing. But I thought it was really interesting. And that apparently that's the 16th century registry of wills. Who knew that was there? Not me.
Wow.
So I
way.
love the National Archives. They have all kinds of different bits and pieces that you just wouldn't necessarily think to look
Well,
for.
there is, I remember we did a blog a while ago about William Shakespeare's will.
Yeah. Second best bed.
Yeah, second best bed. He left his wife his second best bed, and apparently that was something really, really good.
Yeah, well, when I first read it, I was like, that's a little bit rude, a bit cheeky, but apparently it is quite a high honour getting the second best
quite
bed.
a high honour to be left the second class bed, the second best bed, which is amazing. It's quite funny. So, when we going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier about families, secret children, all that kind of stuff, has DNA and the whole ancestry services, has that influenced things from a family dynamics and connections? And, what do you think about the whole DNA side of this?
I think it really has. I mean, quite often if people come to me and want me to help them with their own family research and maybe we've got gaps in the family tree, I will quite often say, it may be worth getting your DNA done to see if we can fill in some information. I've been recently helping a chap whose mum was adopted, and he thought there was a connection maybe to the adoptive family, that perhaps she'd been a child that was of somebody on one side or the other who was an unwed mother, and his grandparents had sort of taken that child on. So he's sort of looking at that with his sister at the moment. They're both in their 80s, so they're a little bit cautious about it. But I think they're quite, they're quite into it, But I do think DNA's a good, it's a good skill. It's a lot of information there that, people don't necessarily wouldn't be able to find otherwise.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just have a reminder for everybody to have their be on mute and have the videos off? That'd be great. Sorry, thank you. So no, that's an interesting one though, isn't it? And how does adoption affect that kind of genealogy route?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because obviously I'm sure you've seen the shows on the TV, Pippa. There's a lot of shows these days. I was watching one recently. I think it was the one with on BBC Two. I'm trying to think of the lady's name. And it was a lot of sort of groups of children who were biologically connected because they had the same donor father. And had sort of reached out to each other and sort of become this kind of sibling family unit, really. A case I came across, again, bone of vacantia, many years ago, was a lady who her husband had passed away. She'd had one son. He had died. He had a son himself, so a grandchild of the deceased lady. However, he'd been adopted out of the family. He'd been adopted by his stepfather and his birth mother, which obviously meant legally he'd lost any entitlement to this lady's estate. However, obviously he knew who his biological father was. And actually in the last sort of 10, 15 years of her life, he'd had a lot of contact with her. So legally, he's not part of that family and therefore can't inherit. But then you've got that emotional, ethical side of things of, well, actually, he's been the one who's been taking her to her hospital appointments and, generally having that relationship of a grandparent and grandchild. So
Yeah.
should he have an entitlement to that estate? It's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not always as cut and dried as we'd like it to be, which is
No,
probably
and
where our contentious colleagues come in.
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to see that whether they have, because obviously they have a right to their adopted family,
Of
but
course, and
yeah,
that would be your counter argument, wouldn't it? But
yeah,
on the other hand, I think it is a bit of a tricky one, particularly
yeah.
that scenario.
Yeah, where there'd been that relationship for many periods of
Yeah,
time. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And so, I mean, if like with DNA, they find, there's a secret sibling over here that they didn't know about when they're executing their parents' will or anything, that sibling obviously has biological rights, or is
well,
part of the
yeah,
biological,
yeah,
so
yeah.
therefore has
Technically
rights in that.
speaking, I mean that is one of the reasons why obviously I can do all the research in the world, but I always say you must insure an estate. You must be
Yeah,
careful and make sure, because whilst we've done everything that we can and we've tried to cover all of our bases, you never know whether or not cousin Mabel had a love child when she was 16 and
yeah,
potentially given it up for adoption, maybe, but then for whatever reason that adoption hasn't happened. But
yeah,
legally on paper, that person is still part of that family. So,
yeah,
you do have to be certain that, particularly in our world these days, we've got to cover ourselves for every eventuality, haven't we? Which is why
yeah.
insurance is so important.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you flip it to the other side, when you're preparing wills, it's really important that if you're not going to include somebody that perhaps exists, that it's really important that, these family secrets that might be there, that they are
Yeah.
covered off in the will. So that's really important why it's the interview and getting the family history and asking those in-depth questions of people to make sure there's none of that going on is so important, would you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure a lot of our colleagues on the call do this anyway, but sort
Yeah,
of do a bit of a brief family tree within their notes and what have you.
yeah,
I do have a sort of blank sheet if anybody ever wants one that you can just sort of fill in as you're going along. I think it's really important to do that, and obviously make sure everybody's on there, even if for whatever reason you're not including them in the will. In fact,
yeah,
they're probably more important in some respects.
yeah,
um, and maybe quantify why that's happening.
yeah,
Unfortunately, family relationships, as we know, do break down.
yeah,
And of course, as the testator, you're perfectly entitled to leave your estate to whoever you want to.
yeah,
But particularly in our world these days, as I was just saying about the contentious side of things,
yeah.
I think you've really got to cover all bases so that people don't start coming out of the woodwork in the future, and then that causes problems for potentially whoever you have left your estate to.
Yeah, and having very clear reasons why you're not including them
Exactly. Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
in that. And I think that's important. In fact, at one of the Women in Wills events, I was sat next to a very lovely barrister who was doing a presentation. And she was, 'cause obviously we were talking, obviously we're legal tech, I'm talking about technology. And she was
Mm-hmm.
saying that she really felt that, from a contentious perspective, be interested to see anybody on the call, their thoughts on it. She felt, videos were really important in that you could actually, I mean, I remember watching the film, I can't remember what it's called now, is Eddie Murphy, where we had to spend loads of money to inherit, and
Dick
there's a
Brewster's
video,
Millions or
really,
something like
Bruce's
that,
Millions,
Pippa.
that's the one. And, there's a video of Brewster basically saying, this is what I want you to do in order to inherit, blah, blah, blah. And, she was saying, that could actually help a lot of contentious
I
situations,
imagine it would. Yeah.
them having that there. So, I'd be really interested in people who are on there, what they think about that and whether they feel that would be of interest there. So, yeah, because you never know, do you, how connected people are. And like you say, somebody's being like, just a few miles down the road and is a relative that never
Exactly.
knew it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because you can be biologically closely related to somebody and not really have
yeah,
a huge amount to do with them for whatever reason. And
yeah,
then there can be other people who, you are connected with in whatever way.
yeah,
And they can be on the other side of the world, really.
yeah.
It is a funny thing, I think.
See, I
Like I
always love
say,
that. 6 degrees of separation, isn't it? That you're
Yeah,
supposed to
yeah.
be
Well, they say,
connected
don't
to
they, that
everybody.
everybody
Yeah,
can, within 6 degrees, can connect to somebody.
yeah,
I don't know who I would pick. What my stepbrother actually works on Hollyoaks, so I suppose that would probably be my avenue. There
yes.
must be
There you
something
go.
on Hollyoaks that I'm connected to that way.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple actually that I always use.
That's good.
Um, I used to be taught to row by the father of the guy that has married Keira Knightley.
Ah, now then, I
That's
like
a
that
good one, isn't
connection.
it? I thought
Hmm.
that was a really good one. The other one, I used to work with somebody whose brother-in-law was Richard Armitage, that was in Spooks and
Oh,
some of those as
brilliant.
well.
I really
Yeah,
like
so-
Richard Armitage. He's a great actor.
but
Have
they're
you
not.
seen the Harlan Coben
I saw the
series
one
that he's
on
been doing on Netflix?
Netflix. I
Lot
did see
those have
that
got
one.
family mysteries and things in.
Yeah, it's all all a bit, yeah. It's all good stuff. Okie doke, let's get back on topic. Sorry, we just there. So, in terms of genealogy, are there any trends or innovations that you're particularly excited about?
Um, well, not really sure to be honest. Trends I love in particular are when, say for instance, like in my family, my eldest daughter's birthday is the same day as it's the same date as my granddad. Um,
Okay.
and one of his nieces has also got the same birth date as well. Um, and I remember actually when my daughter was born, my I, my actual due date was 2 days before their birthday. And I'd said to my granddad, "Oh, she'll arrive on time. It'll be fine, you know."
Yeah.
And so the day before she was due, the 12th of March, she actually came on the 14th. I'd posted a parcel to my granddad with a little present because I couldn't drive anymore because I was so
Yeah.
huge. Um, and I'd put a little note in his card and I'd said, "I'm really hoping that your other present arrives on time, but don't hold
Yeah.
me to it," kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And of course she did. I knew she would.
Yeah.
And when he came to see her at the hospital, because she was the first great grandchild as well. Oh,
Oh, wonderful.
honestly, you've never seen a man so proud of himself in your life. I was just a non-entity.
Oh, it is one of those things, isn't it, where you just think, well, it has to start somewhere. And
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
when you start that there, the two people meeting
Yeah.
in a dance hall in the wall or
Well,
something
funnily
like
enough,
that, and
that
then look
my
at all of
grandparents
these
did meet in
people.
a dance hall. They met at a
Oh,
tea
really?
dance.
There you go.
Apparently, my gran had an emerald green dress on, so I'm reliably told.
Yeah, and that meet cute or whatever they like to call it, has actually made the
Yeah.
whole process happen. It's quite
Yeah,
nice.
it's
Isn't it?
funny, isn't it? When I do sort of presentations in real life, I
Yeah,
have a family tree that I bring that's my family tree, the Langton family tree,
yeah,
which is where the name came from. It's actually my
yeah,
mum's maiden name. Um, and so on there, I've got my great grandparents, her grandparents, James and Mary Langton. And from them, and we're still counting because obviously we've still got people having babies and things like that. We're
yeah.
currently on, I think we're on 136 descendants.
Wow.
So that's
So how
children,
far back have you
grandchildren,
gone?
great grandchildren, great
Yeah.
great grandchildren. We've got on there as well now.
So how
So
far
yeah.
back have you gone in your own family history then?
So my own family history with regard to the Langtons, I've gone
Yeah.
back to the sort of mid 1700s.
Wow.
Um, Purportedly, we're descended from a guy called Stephen Langton, who was the brother of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Oh, there you go. There's another
Yeah, six
six
degrees
degrees of
separate. Yeah.
separation, isn't there?
That's just it's
Um,
actually in the family. Yeah.
Indeed. But there's just this little gap that I've never quite been able to bridge. I think I know where it all fits in, but
Yeah.
for my genealogical proof evidence,
You need
if you
proof.
like,
Yeah.
I think it fits, but I couldn't hand on heart sort of declare it to a solicitor and say, yeah, this is all perfectly fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So why would you say that estate planners, solicitors in the private client arena should engage with genealogists?
Well, I think a lot of the time, maybe it's just about fact checking the information that you've been given.
Yeah.
I've just this morning had an inquiry that was basically a lady, unfortunately, she's passed away. She's left a small part of her will to a cousin who's died, but she's not made any provision for that then to pass on. So
Yeah.
it obviously becomes an intestacy. the family are the other beneficiaries, so it's quite clear cut that she's got
Yeah.
3 siblings,
Yeah.
and basically it should all go to them. But
Yeah.
the inquiry was, can you just check and make sure that you can't see anything that would indicate anything different?
Yeah.
It's just a bit of a verification of the family tree, really.
Yeah.
So often I get asked to do that, and then if something comes up, then I can say, right, okay, I've checked everything, and yes, that's all fine.
Yeah.
But there are these couple of little bits of information that I think really just need double checking.
Yeah.
And then, obviously we'll look at whether or not they want to proceed with that. We did a family tree a number of years ago, actually, for the lady at the same firm who had had an inquiry from a gentleman who said he was the nephew of the deceased.
Okay.
And turned out she died intestate. He had kind of assumed that because he was next of kin on her medical paperwork, that he would just be able to sort everything out.
Yeah.
But then when she told me his name and her name, I couldn't connect the dots. It turned out that he was the son of her husband's stepsister, or there's no biological connection in any way, shape, or form. No. And we actually ended up with over 50 beneficiaries on that estate.
Wow.
Yeah, all various cousins. I think she'd had a half-blood sister who had died without any children. Obviously, she had passed away with no issue. Yeah. And so we then went to family. But the research went back to like the 1850s, because I think she died in sort of like her early 90s. It was a second marriage for dad.
Yeah.
And mum was maybe 40ish. I think he was in his 50s. So you were back in like the mid to early 1800s before you even, got as far as just aunts and uncles.
Trying to work it
so there are a lot of generations to get through, So that took quite a long time, actually, but we got there in the end.
Yeah, fascinating. So you've been employed, self-employed for about 14 years now. How do you find that? Was it easy making that leap?
Well, it was one of those things where I kind of accidentally fell into it, really. So I worked for the General Register Office for 6 years between having my children. Prior to that, I was office administration. I did customer services and accounts and that kind of thing, which I really enjoyed. Did a lot of credit control, which was really satisfactory, sort of collecting those monies in and what have you. Particularly, I work for a builders firm, and they do what they call retention, which is like 5% of the value of the invoice. Trying to get that back after the fact is a nightmare. So I always used to be a little pat on the back for myself when I managed to sort out some of those.
That's a good skill to have when somebody doesn't pay your bill now, isn't it?
Exactly, yes, yeah. So I worked at the General Register Office for 6 years, and as it happened, when I had my youngest daughter, I'd just gone on maternity leave, and unfortunately my mother-in-law got taken ill and passed away quite suddenly. So our family dynamic changed. There was no longer Gran to help with the childcare and things, and so I decided not to go back to work. And kind of fell into this in a way, really, and then just kind of progressed it to make it the business that I've got now, which will 15 years at the end of this year. So it's really good.
So looking back, would you have done anything differently, or
what advice
would you give to somebody setting up by themselves?
I am glad that I took the leap of faith when I did. I think had our family situation not changed, I probably would have just plodded on with the kind of 9 to 5 and done that, and probably been very happy with it. Actually, I really love what I do now. I'm very fortunate to do a job that I enjoy so much, and along the way I've made some really nice friends, I would say, not just colleagues, really nice friends. And I've been very fortunate. I think women in sales is a big part for me, really, so that's been really great.
Excellent. So anything else you'd like to tell people that are listening today?
Anything else I'd like to tell them? I don't know, really. Put me on the spot there.
It's really good. Well, look, it's been fascinating chatting to you. I think it's been really interesting spilling those family secrets across the board and how you find out about that. And I think, a key message there to all the listeners is, make sure that you are doing all that research into the families, because a lot of families do have those secrets there. So thank you very much, Claire. It's been really
Well, thank
interesting
you for
talking
having
to you
me.
today. Thank you all for the. Is there any questions that we've got there? Please feel free to type them in the chat there. Just while I'm waiting to see if there's any questions coming in, just to announce that the next one in the series will be on the 5th of June. And we're very lucky to be joined by Emma Bryson and Natasha McKeever for Micklemore's. And the subject we're going to be tackling then is about moving to a new firm, but also to a bigger organisation and firm there. So I think that will be absolutely fascinating there to find out the advice that they've got because they've both just done that. I don't think we've got any questions, so I think we just say thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you very much, guys. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye now. Bye. We're having lots of thank yous in, which is lovely. All right. See you soon, guys. Bye bye.